So, how much do
What a
you
cold open.
how much do you remember from
Yesterday?
from the first time we did this? Yeah,
Huh. I'm gonna say about 3%.
Oh God, do you even remember what the topic of the day is?
The first succession war, aka the only succession war, the Great War, something along them lines that they totally never referred to as or stole from any other time in history.
Oh my God. Thank whatever deities out there you actually remember some things. Yeah, so we're starting with the first...
Amazing what happens when I don't take a gummy or something, I don't know.
Oh, are we going to try to recreate all the banter as well? Because that'll be just great.
I don't know if it's possible.
It's not. There's no
but
way.
I did try to forget everything to try to make it as accurate as possible.
Oh God, this is gonna be an absolute. So I need to put a pause right here for anyone that's watching this. I am so sorry about this lengthy opening. Long story short, I messed up the recording the first time we did this, so we went through like an hour and 40 minutes of recording this video, and then it was just corrupted and didn't work, and I got maybe 20% of it was actually usable footage. So, hooray, we're doing it again, which means all the banter, all the stuff, it all has to be done again from the top. So, if you're wondering, man, why do Sai and Steve sound really tired and really sarcastic and really done with life this whole video? That's why. It also fits the tone, because learning about the first Succession War is going to make you really done with life and really cynical and really sarcastic, because the entire motto of this video is just, and then it got worse. It is arguably one of the most important events in the history of BattleTech. It's the seminal tragedy that kicked off hundreds of years of backsliding, war, destruction, and suffering. It laid the groundwork in its buildup for the Exodus and clans, Comstar and the Word of Blake later, the Successor Lords, the fact that the Capellans refused to die, even though they're like the only successor state that deserves to lose the succession wars. And it created the battlefield that's the most played of all BattleTech eras, the 28th to 31st century, or the late succession wars. Also, there's, like Steve mentioned, a frankly adorable level of optimism that each of the successor states had going into the first succession war. Because they did a World War I, they called it the Succession War, like people called it the Great War instead of World War I, explicitly assuming that it would be the only one. And oh man, time traveler goes back in time. It's the World War. Oh cool. Which one is this?
Which episode are we on, guys?
Oh yeah. Hey, what's going on? Oh, this is the Succession War. Oh cool. Which one? Oh god, no. Lo and behold, like 4 succession wars later. And also, this video is going to cover the general gist of things. We will not be going into every single battle, warfront event, or character death. There is simply too much, and I can't be bothered to make a 10-hour video. If I really wanted to, this could easily be like a 10 to 12 part video series where it would be like 10 to 20 hours long by the end of it. However, if you do want to see a real in-depth dive into something like this, if you do want that nitty-gritty detail, I'd recommend checking out a different channel, SvenVanDerPlanks, which I will link in a pinned comment and in the description below. He makes great content, he handles this kind of stuff way better than Sai ever could for the details, though be prepared to spend an entire day because, oh god, his video on the first Succession War is 6 hours long, and he moves fast. He's got a lot to cover. He's booking it, and it still took him 6 hours.
A short critique of the prequels, 13-hour video.
I've seen that video. I'm only like 2/3 of the way through it, though. I've been watching it in 1-hour segments like every week for the last 3 months.
I haven't even started. It's in there somewhere to be watched, but
it's on the to-do list.
Yeah, as long as like 8 million other things.
Oh yeah, same. What we will be covering in this video, though, is how the Succession War started, what the initial conditions were, what the fighting was like, how brutal it could get, and a few of the major events, and of course why the Draconis Combine is the villain of the setting. And I hope all the Drac fans out there get ready to cope and seethe, because we're heading for Kentares and Helm today, and you can't stop me.
Especially not after what we already had to endure.
Oh yeah. We've gone through all of this before. You should also expect to leave this video with like a general understanding of what the first Succession War was like. But first, Introductions. Generic greetings and welcome to Science Insanity, a channel dedicated to bringing my love of sci-fi in all of its stupid glory to you, the viewer. Along for the ride and filling in as my co-host and content minion is Steve. Introduce yourself, Steve.
Hello, I am Steve.
Oh,
Fuck
you can.
This.
I was about to be like, he's so happy to be here, you can hear it, and you cut me off immediately. We have to do this, Steve, okay? I'm sorry. I'm stuck here with you as well. But the channel members voted on it. They're the ones that picked this video. We have an obligation to fulfill. This is our contract. They're paying us. We have to do it.
It's only because they're
Chop,
so
chop.
good to us.
We made a joke the first time around that they wanted us to record this because they like watching us suffer in before we're doing it a second time, and they get an even better attempt the second time round. Oh, God. If you couldn't tell, we're both super happy to be here again. And with that, let's get into things. We've covered a lot of the events around this peripherally on the channel before, like the Exodus, the Star League Civil War, Kerensky, I think. So you should have a baseline knowledge, Steve, and the audience of kind of what we're talking about, but we've never actually talked about the First Succession War directly. And assuming you remember anything from when we did this yesterday, the recording died. No, well, regardless, we're doing the refresher segment again. That's not optional. I do need to establish those preconditions.
Oh,
Yeah, it's mandatory for the flow of the video. We got to establish a chronology here, okay? So we're going to start after the Star League Civil War. The grounds for the Succession Wars were laid because good old fat Genghis Khan, Stephen Amaris, eater of buffets, assassin of kings, shitter of fine pants, ruiner of nice things, decided he was going to execute the entire Cameron bloodline, leaving nobody to inherit the position of First Lord of the Terran hegemony and Star League. At the time, seemed like a decent idea. He just pulled off a massive coup, took control of his own mini-empire. Why keep any legitimate claimants around that could potentially challenge his rule? Except, unfortunately, he didn't account for Kerensky kicking the proverbial and eventual literal door down with his Orion and beating Stefan's dreams to death with a crowbar. Skipping over quite a bit of drama and conflict about that whole mess, this resulted in a bit of an issue by the end of the Star League Civil War, because the Star League was still around, though its entire power, logistics, administrative, and governmental base was rubble. The Terran hegemony was in flames, and while the SLDF was still the strongest power in the sphere, it was badly mauled, and aside from Kerensky, had no real leadership at the highest level. And the House Lords went even further by stripping Kerensky of his role at the top as protector of the Star League. Meanwhile, during the Star League Civil War, the great houses, like the greedy little rats they are, started stealing hegemony worlds. They claimed it was for humanitarian or security reasons, and yeah, I mean, those worlds probably would have starved without help, so it's sort of legitimate, but they were doing the thing that all grand strategy players do, and they're just trying to paint the whole map in whatever color their faction is, because they have a brainworm that compels them to do that, just like every other noble that's ever sat atop the fancy chair.
the chair that kills everyone. And we still refuse to be original with the chair. I'm not going on the long diatribe again. They have to deal with it, I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, that's just what happens. Everybody that's ever tried to...
Insert 15-minute spiel here about every universe using this.
Every sci-fi setting ever has the big fancy imperial chair, and everybody who inevitably sits on it dies a horrible, awful death because something, power corrupts absolutely, something, the weight of the crown crushes all who wear it, yada yada yada. Science fiction isn't original, no extra thoughts under the sun. Yes, we've had the 15-minute diatribe last time through.
Yep, that pretty much covers it, so.
So, the only worlds that the successor states, that's not correct, they are the great houses still. They are not the successor states yet. The only worlds that the successor states didn't try to snatch were the core worlds of the hegemony, including Earth itself. This was about 30 to 40 worlds that made up the bulk of population and industry at the core of the Terran hegemony. With the end of the Civil War came the effort of figuring out what to do. The most pressing matter would become who's the new First Lord of the Star League. Most of the time, in real life, whoever gets to wear the crown when there's multiple claimants is a bit of a civil war magnet because, you know, it's good to be king. But in BattleTech, it's arguably far, far worse because the reward is far, far greater. The First Lord of the Star League wasn't just Space King in all but name, they also controlled the Terran hegemony and pretty much the entirety of the Star League defense forces. Their job was basically to be the middleman, the diplomat, the diplomatic force that kept all the others in check and made sure that if anyone got uppity and started a war, then they would have to fight the Star League as well as whoever they were starting the war against. But if one of the existing member states, one of the Great Lords, were to claim the title, they'd become functionally unstoppable. Not only their own empire, but that of the Star League would be able to brute force their control over the rest of the Star League, and by definition, the rest of humanity as well. Now, the sensible thing to do would be to elect some distant third cousin, or someone close or trustworthy, or just some random nobody, and then create like a new different house name, or just elect somebody by majority vote, you know? That way you could avoid the worst possible outcomes. Just keep trucking as was. No?
We don't do sensible here.
No? No sensibility? Why's that?
Because it's a BattleTech, sir. We refuse to do anything along those lines.
Well, it's not necessarily BattleTech that refuses to do sensible things. In this case, it was just the Draconis Combine and their coordinator, Minoru Kurita. They existed, so smart options and diplomacy was off the table. There was a chance before this, as bitter, hateful, and greedy as the various House Lords are, they did spend months debating, arguing, and trying to figure out a peaceful solution, even going so far as to barter various worlds between one another, adjust the border, and make whatever deal they possibly could. Meeting in person on Earth every time for these talks, something that was unheard of and wouldn't be seen again for hundreds of years. The breaking point, though, it's Kurita, because it's always the Combine, the villains of the setting. The breaking point came when Minoru Kurita stood up and put forth himself as nominee for the new First Lord of the Star League. Do you remember how he did it from the first time around, Steve?
He stood up and said, this is mine now, and no one else has a voice.
Yep, in the most "it's mine because I said so" tone imaginable, literal space Karen, he just stood up with no tact, no diplomacy whatsoever, and just said, "I am the new First Lord of the Star League," and then went on to say that nobody else had any right to it. Because, and I shit you not, he just believed it should be his, and decided that that was enough for the fate of the universe. And then he realized, once every other House Lord stood up and said, "You know what, actually, it's mine," then he realized that peace was impossible. Like, no shit, genius. You think you're the only one that can stand up and say fanciful words and that everyone will just listen to what was arguably the most hated faction in the setting at the time, run by the most hated leader of the time?
Obviously he did. I mean...
Well, yeah, clearly, otherwise he wouldn't have done it.
Exactly.
But the point stands, his delusion and insanity does not conform to reality. So part of the reason why the Kuritans were so hated and why this was never going to go over well is because during the Civil War, while all the other great houses were either actively helping Kerensky or at the very least not hindering him and the SLDF, the Kuritans were either playing the fence or actively helping Stefan. And it got so bad that Kerensky had to invade the Draconis Combine several times just to access storehouses and launching points for their invasion that were already controlled by the SLDF. It just boggles the mind how he thought that he could ever diplomacy his way out of this when, you know what, classic Kuritans, man. That's all I'm gonna say. Just classic Kuritans. So from the rest of the sphere's perspective, the Kuritans and the Draconis Combine were traitorous, opportunistic warmongers trying for a blatant power grab at the expense of everyone else. So no different from usual, but made all the worse this time because, you know, they were face to face to watch it rather than being able to disconnect him over holocall. But Kurita's attempts at politics, let's call it, marked the end of the Star League. Any chance for peace was over. And after Kerensky gathered the SLDF and took off on the Exodus, there was now nothing in the way of the great houses and no more wild cards left to consider. Everyone knew what was about to happen and everyone was ready to throw down. And while 2786 marked the official beginning of the Succession War, since, you know, that's when the nukes started flying and the mass-scale armies and invasions began, it's probably more accurate to say that the first Succession War started 3 to 4 years earlier, during a time that was called the Phony War, another blatant throwback to early World War II. Can you see the hand of the writers mirroring history a little bit here?
No original thoughts. still.
No original thoughts under the sun. Now, despite being called the Phony War, it was anything but. This 3-year period was marked by dozens of vicious raids and skirmishes, mostly over Terran hegemony worlds, but also across their borders to test the strength and preparedness of one another. This is, and I mean it very seriously, the most peaceful and reasonable part of the conflict. It's already war crime o'clock. They've already set the dial to 11, and the only direction to go is forward and faster. The only thing that can happen is get worse, because this is the first succession war.
It's the most peaceful part of it. Therefore, obviously, it was only phony.
I mean, I guess when you're judging the severity of the conflict by how many billions of people are dead, a few tens of thousands to a few hundreds of thousands in an afternoon is kind of not a big deal, so...
Exactly.
You know, I guess by the sliding scale of comparison, yeah, this was the Phony War. So some of these early raids being horrific is putting it mildly, and the very first raid that we'll talk about was the Free Worlds League carrying out an assault against the Capellan industrial and shipbuilding world of Aldebaran. Thankfully, it was attacked by the near Death Star instead, and the world survived, but the Capellan-owned jump ship dockyards, not so much. And yes, I am doing the terrible joke again. I left it in. I'm gonna highlight it again.
I need it here.
No, come on, don't you get it? It's the world of Aldebaran. Nope. And it was attacked by the near Death Star. This is it's off-brand from that other science fiction setting, that really niche one.
Oh, this is an Asylum movie now. Is that what we're doing?
Yeah.
We're doing Asylum movies in this?
I guess. I don't know what's going on anymore. I don't get the reference. I'm just here. I'm along for the ride now. I'm filling in for you now, Steve.
You don't know the Asylum?
No.
The makers of Snakes on a Train?
No.
Atlantic Rim?
Oh, wait, those guys. Yeah, you showed me that. It's nothing but parodies with them. Okay. Yeah, yes. All right.
No, there's some original movies, sir. Sharknado.
Okay, yeah.
They're original movies. I didn't say they were masterpieces, although the original is.
You know what?
They're original.
Yes. This is an Asylum version of Star Wars. The planet Aldebaran was attacked by the near Death Star. This is so bad. I'm highly tempted to cut this from the video, but they're probably going to enjoy it a lot, even though it's awful, so I'll leave it in. The Capellans, dockyards, and jump ship manufactories did not survive this raid. And here's the thing, we don't know much about it, and I'll freely admit that I'm kind of pulling stuff out of my ass here, but we do have some surrounding info to guesstimate on. The raid was described as particularly and overtly brutal. We also know that it entirely obliterated the dockyards, rendering them molten slag in orbit, and that it inflicted horrific casualties from all the people living in the habitats around it and on the station itself. So it's probably fairly safe to assume that this was, at a bare minimum, saturating orbit with radiation and debris and killing thousands, if not tens of thousands of people. So, starting off strong with thousands or tens of thousands dead. Another early raid was by the Draconis Combine against the Lyran Commonwealth world of Scandia. In this case, the war crime weebs lived up to the name because when they landed, the Lyran forces moved immediately to garrison and protect the industrial and military targets. Do you remember why they did this instead of protecting, like, the planet overall?
The Geneva Conventions.
Yes, do you remember the name for them in BattleTech?
Nope, we're just going to call them the Geneva Conventions. Yes, I do remember. I'm simply not saying it.
Okay, thank you for playing hard to get. The Ares Conventions, which is what the Geneva Conventions in space are called, are essentially what you'd think of as the standard rules of war. Don't target civilians, no WMDs, keep fights away from cities, don't shoot at medical personnel, clearly labeled, that kind of stuff, right? To prevent war crimes. Well, the Cretan forces looked at the fact that all of the industry and all of the important stuff was garrisoned by very heavy Lyran mech forces and decided, you know what, I have a better idea. They decided to just start indiscriminately killing civilians until the Steiner forces came out to fight. And I mean, like, completely indiscriminate. They find a farming village, all dead. They stumble upon a mining outpost, all dead. An outlying city borough, burned to the ground. Hospitals, orphanages, puppy hospital orphanages, doesn't matter. They killed everyone. And the entire reason they did this was to draw the Lyrans out by convincing them to fight for their home and their families, which was successful, and the Caretans eventually flanked around behind them and destroyed several mech factories and heavily damaged several other production lines for weapons and ammunition. There was also a hilarious Benny Hill moment later on when the Capellans and Draconis Combine both, at the same time, entirely independent and ignorant of one another, raided the world of towns owned by the Fed Sons, each running amok on one...
Is this world made of towns, or is it just the world of towns, or...
No, that's the name of the planet, Towns. Towne.
Are there a lot of towns on it?
That's an excellent question. I'll assume yes, considering that there was enough chaos and enough violence and enough people there to have a death toll in the hundreds of thousands, so...
Okay, but were they towns or were they cities?
I don't know. What's the cutoff between a town and a city? How many people are we talking about?
I don't know, like 100,000, I guess.
You know what? We'll just say yes, it's the city of towns. It's like a giant checkerboard grid. Now, each of them ran amok on a different hemisphere, and the Fed Sons were basically running in circles, tripping over their own feet, as they tried and failed horrendously to muster a response. All around, the phony war was raiding and skirmishing on a mass scale. What made it so brutal was that it was testing the waters. Up until this point, the Ares Conventions, essentially the rules of war, had kept everyone in check, even during the hidden wars of the Star League era, no killing civilians and all of that. But during the phony war, every faction was pushing and prodding to see how far they could go without directly incurring a sun to the face. How can I break the rules just enough to do war crimes, but not enough to actually face a response for it? Eventually, though, it had to escalate beyond this point. The first major operation was Operation Elbow Joint, launched by the Lyran Commonwealth. You should remember a decent amount about this, yeah?
What a name. I remember me saying, what a name, and then us going off on a tangent about it being called Elbow Joint or Dongle. Everyone, it was down below whether he would rather be told your son died in Operation Elbow Joint or Operation Dongle. Please let us know.
Oh, God, yeah. So, Operation Elbow Joint was targeted against the Bolin Thumb, the salient of Free Worlds League territory that jutted into the Lyran Commonwealth, or, as our audience would be more familiar with it, the Purple Bird's dongle that they keep dragging across the Germans' face. And the Germans really, really, really didn't like this, and they wanted it gone. So, they used the First Succession War as their opportunity to take it by force. The operation was first targeted at the world of Bolin, a key hub world for the Free Worlds League to operate in the Bolin Thumb, and the world that the salient was named after. The Lyran justification for a preemptive strike was that Bolin was a staging ground for a massive invasion of their territory. Insert dongle joke, and they were right. Bolin had many more times the supplies and weapons stockpiled on it than the defenders could ever possibly use, including a large stockpile of atomic weapons. And while Purple Bird forces had been moved off Bolin to go invade the crumbling Terran hegemony, the Lyrans were right, and the Purple Bird was gearing up to invade the Commonwealth. Attacking the world in force, the Lyrans pushed any orbital defenders back before landing across the planet en masse. The depleted garrison stood little chance and decided to dig in around the capital city and several other major settlements across the planet. However, it wasn't enough. The Lyrans bombed and shelled the defenders' positions brutally and essentially leveled everything before paving over the rubble that was left with heavy battle mechs and infantry assaults. Whenever the defenders tried to fire back with their own airstrikes or artillery, they were counter-batteried by 10 times as much return fire. Sensing their imminent defeat and being ordered to prevent the loss of all that equipment to Lyran hands, no matter the cost, the Free Worlds League commander, named Tut, which we shall henceforth call King Tut, ordered his troops to evacuate, sacrificing most of his damaged units in suicidal frontal attacks, while the rest of the battle-ready ones attempted to evacuate the world. This was not particularly successful, though, and King Tut only managed to extract a fraction of his forces from the planet, and once the Lyran warships realized what was happening, they moved in to engage and cut off any further escape. But by that point, it was too late. King Tut ordered his last 2 remaining ships to take up positions in low orbit, prep their launch bays, and fire. The Free Worlds League
legalized nuclear bombs.
that was not the one I thought it was, honestly. But
Which one did you want to play? Because that was basically perfect for the situation at hand.
well, yes, but it's another one of that. So, do I not have it anywhere? It's the Here Comes the Sun, do.
Oh yeah, that would be
That's
great.
the one I was looking for, but I
Yeah.
don't see that one on here. So, is this man's actual name King Tut, or is this just you calling him that, or are we still repeating history?
No, that's his actual name. It's Tut. T-U-T-T.
Is it King Tut, though?
No, it's not King Tut. I can't blame you, though.
Okay.
BattleTech has horrendously terrible names. It's like the Capellans had Sun Tzu Liao, so like, yeah, sometimes they just do be doing that. Like I was saying, though, they prepped their launch bays and they fired. The Free Worlds League bombarded their own planet from orbit, saturating the battlefield with atomic blasts. Each city held by the Lyrans, gone. Every military stockpile in the world, gone. The capital city that was about to fall, a Pyrrhic victory for the Lyrans at best, as most of their forces, along with all the remaining FWL units, got to taste the sun. In the short time that the conflict had been raging, Steiner had killed some 20 to 30,000 civilians with their indiscriminate artillery and airstrikes. In minutes, due to the actions of King Tut and his 2 warships in orbit, the death toll on Bolin jumped to over 8 million people. And even 400 years later, the density of the atomic bombardment means that Bolin's primary continent is uninhabitable, and the other 2 subcontinents are highly irradiated and barely capable of sustaining life. If you want to pick a moment where the First Succession War turned from a war into a collective suicide, this is it, especially since this was Pandora's box. The Free Worlds League successfully obliterated like 10 times more Lyran forces than they lost themselves. By all counts, a numerical victory, but a strategic and tactical defeat because now the strategy was legitimized. Someone had crossed that red line into mass atomic bombardment, and as the Lyran assaults on other worlds in the Bolin Thumb began, stubborn defenders found themselves not even being attacked, simply erased from orbit by nuclear strikes, made even worse when the Free Worlds League raided the Lyran worlds back in retaliation and resorted to nukes at the slightest sign of resistance or stalling progress. In some cases, raiding worlds for seemingly no other reason than nuking local supply depots and erasing local populations to slow down Steiner's advance into the Bolin Thumb. It became so brutal and the fighting so bloody that in some cases the populations of Free Worlds League planets simply rebelled, aiding the Lyrans out of fear that the FWLM forces might render their planets nuclear hellscapes as well for the crime of losing to superior forces. And essentially, they chose the lesser of 2 evils, hoping that a quick Lyran victory would mean that they get to keep on living, at least in some form, under a new ruler. And this is really where the tragedy of the First Succession War comes from. This is what distinguishes it from basically every other conflict in BattleTech, because it's hard to really convey seriously and do a good job of it, so I'm not even going to bother trying, but...
Science Insanity channel, well known for seriousness.
Yeah, the channel overall is not particularly serious, so if you're expecting like a serious grimdark take on it, not so much. It's analogies, jokes, and lampshading here, because, I mean, honestly, the First Succession War is so horrific that you've got 2 choices, which is cry about it or laugh about it. I choose to laugh about it, because who comes here to be sad? People come here to be happy and laugh at things.
Well, there might be some people that come here to be sad. They might get sad out off of seeing people happy. If you're here for that, I hope you hate your time here.
No, that's so sad, Steve. Stop that. No, nobody.
It doesn't fit what we did yesterday with that bit.
No, it doesn't, because it's different. This is the second time around. It doesn't.
It's nowhere near as good.
Throw in new banter, okay? We can just do new banter.
No, I must include the highlights.
Okay.
That was one of the best portions of it yesterday.
It was one of the best portions of it yesterday, but we ruined it, Steve. We ruined it.
We ruined it.
We ruined it. I messed up the recording. You messed up the delivery. We're both half at fault here. Oh, man. But like I was saying, you know the way that people in RPGs will like hoard potions and magical items for the entire RPG? Like you've got 200 full heals, a few dozen revives, the magic staff of instantly murdering whatever boss you pointed at, but...
Yeah, man, you never know when you're going to use them, man.
Yeah, but that's
gotta keep them.
that's why people hoard them, because they're like, maybe I'll need them later. Better not use them now and just keep trucking. Well, that's the mentality that every successor lord had for the last like 400, 500 years since the Age of War. They all expected horrific, brutal conquest and war, and ever since the Age of War, the Great House army, like they've waxed and waned a little here and there, but mostly they've just kept getting bigger because they were zealously hoarding their forces. None of them wanted to commit anything to an engagement they might lose. None of them wanted to take risks. So for hundreds of years, it was raiding, skirmishing, deniable pirate activities. But now, this is it. This is the final boss. You're at the end of the game, and every successor state was going to open and dump their backpack of magical bullshit. Every weapon, every tool, every secret strategy they had was going to be thrown into this fight, no matter how brutal, no matter how inhuman. Anytime you looked like you were going to lose, simply burn down the entire battlefield so the enemy loses with you. I didn't ask how big the planet was, I said I cast the sun. Anytime an enemy is dug in and looks stronger than your invasion force, burn down the entire battlefield, I cast sun. Enemy flanking you, nukes. Enemy retreating, nukes. Enemy fed you false intel, nukes. Enemy gave you pickles when you asked for no pickles on your burger at McDonald's, nukes.
Enemy breathes, nukes.
Yeah, pretty much. Every world the First Succession War touched was invariably scarred horrifically because everything they had was being thrown at each other, to the point where even hundreds of years later, the First Succession War left the deepest scars out of all the conflicts that would come later, as along the borders, you'll find dozens of worlds barely still capable of sustaining life, many shadows of their former selves, and many simply removed from the star charts completely because nobody would ever walk those worlds again. One such world in the Bolan Thumb was named Rochelle. It was rendered functionally lifeless and barren by nuclear exchanges that both the Lyrans and Free Worlds leagued through at it. And this wasn't just limited to the front lines. Granted, the vast majority of this conflict happened on the front lines because jumping large military forces deep into enemy territory was very risky and very unreliable, but it happened everywhere.
They had a little bit of issues with logistics in this universe too, so
Oh, absolutely. With how jump travel works and how FTL works, it tends to be very slow to move very large armies around, but even capital worlds weren't necessarily safe, as a deep strike raid conducted by the Lyran Commonwealth targeted the capital world of the not the Capellans, the Draconis Combine, and raided the world, running absolute roughshod over the entire planet and humiliating the Cretan defenders so badly that every single one of them basically held up in the Imperial City, protecting the seat of power itself, because they couldn't muster the ability or the courage or the forces, whatever it was, to actually go out and challenge the Lyrans. There was nowhere in the Inner Sphere that was safe from the devastation of the First Succession War. And I want to take like a little side note diversion here, off into the weeds a little bit, because this is something I've noticed a lot with people that like get into the setting, especially people that get into the setting because of our content and like part of our community. There's a lot of new people to BattleTech, or that they're new to the lore and stuff, and they're like, hey, we can do like a narrative campaign, or I'll set up like some original characters or something for a match, and we'll do something set in the First Succession War, you know, because we can use like warships for fire support, we can use all the SLDF stuff, we can set up a campaign where they're like fighting over a Star League cache or something, and it's just like, oh no, God, you sweet summer child, you don't get it. As a frontline mech warrior in the First Succession War, you aren't here to win, or really even fight battles. You're here to figure out which side is going to flip the proverbial table in defeat and then nuke the winner. Every battle ends with the winner catching that sun. The end result of you fighting over that Star League cache like you suggested for your little narrative game or whatever, the end result is that all of you die because the moment you beat the enemy, they're just gonna nuke it so that nobody can have it if they can't. And vice versa. If you you lose, you just nuke your opponent. There are no stakes or strategies in the First Succession War. There is only death and suffering.
Really good for a 30-minute campaign, though.
I mean, yeah, I guess. If you wanted to just do throwaway characters, you could create the BattleTech version of, like, Glup Shido, and then, oh no, he was thrown into the sun, and he will never be seen again. What a shame. And then you can move on.
The sun was actually thrown into him.
Okay, yeah. That's fair. The sun was thrown at Glup Shido, not the other way around. But the issue here, you know, and another contributing factor for how horrific the First Succession War turned out to be was that aforementioned bag of magical bullshit. Because it wasn't just a few hundred magical items, i.e. atomic weapons. Every great house had very, very deep pockets full of WMDs, industrial might, and raw manpower to supply this war into the tens of millions of combatants on every front of this war and spread across the interior of their realms. And since every successor state, like I said, would nuke anything they couldn't control, the early days of the First Succession War also saw multiple devastating raids behind the line, like I mentioned. I'm not gonna talk about all of them because there's just so many of them, but factories, industrial complexes, shipping hubs, logistic centers, rumored Star League caches, anything you can imagine, even just people, because screw you, I guess, was burned to the ground. I think one of the best examples of the types of raiding and conflict that was happening behind the lines was a Kharitan raid on the world of Helm. Minoru Kurita is coming back again to be just the worst man alive until his son shows up at Kentares. But so, do you remember the significance of the world of Helm? Do you remember what was on it?
Hell, no.
No. So...
was that your... No, that wasn't the King Crab, John, because you couldn't remember where that was.
No. Helm was the site of a Star League cache of equipment, data, information, and weapons. However...
Was this the gem planet that was, like, really ideal and stuff, and then...
No. That's okay. A different planet. So what happened on Helm was information leaked that there was a rumored Star League cache on the planet. And there was. It would be rediscovered hundreds of years later, and that's where the Helm memory core came from. That's what introduced Lost Tech and brought the Star League's military and economic technology back to the inner sphere after hundreds of years of backsliding. It was used very heavily in the Fourth Succession War, and where FedCom basically kicked the shit out of everybody. Now, they knew that it was there, or they suspected that it was there, but they couldn't confirm it, because the Star League generally did an amazing job of hiding their stuff. Now, Minoru Kurita, a detachment of warships, and a large ground force, secretly managed to slip through the Free Worlds League lines and make it to this world. They scoured the world looking for this Star League technology, and so desperate were they that they were massacring people that didn't help them. If anyone tried to fight back, if there was ever partisans or anything, they just burned down entire villages. Eventually, they even resorted to nuking the capital city as a threat, that if anyone didn't tell them where the Star League cache was, that they would just keep killing people, which seems a little backwards.
I feel like you shouldn't nuke it as the threat, but whatever works for them.
Yeah, no, I was thinking the same thing, where I was like, you're trying to threaten the population into helping you. How do you know that you didn't kill the only people that knew where it was in the capital city? Like that's where the most number of people are, and if you kill them, like, statistically, that's the highest chance of killing anyone that knows about it. So this is just typical Kurita smooth brain shenanigans, but that's not important. Long story short, they failed. They were unable to locate this cache, and Minoru Kurita was so angry and so pissed about this that he ordered the planet to be glassed as they were retreating. So as they pulled off the world, the Kharitans nuked the planet of Helm many, many times, rendering about 2/3 of the planet irradiated deserts, which would slowly, eventually, heal, and they killed 80% of the planet's population in atomic fire. So, like father, like son, depopulating planets just seems to be the Kharitans' thing. And I know I'm really hammering this home, and I will throw you the bone of there's no such thing as, black or white, good or bad, everything's gray in BattleTech, but my god, are the Kharitans really trying to be the bad guys here. Like, they are going out of their way. It's also relatively funny that they failed so utterly, because they never actually bothered to check anything in the rest of the solar system, just on that planet, because there was multiple Star League fighter/hangar bays with hundreds of advanced aerospace fighters and bombers that were just chilling out in the asteroid belt and stuff, just, you know, in hangar bays, just hanging out there.
There really is nothing original. I mean, Kurita does the same thing every single time.
Yeah, it's literally show up, try to do something, fail, kill everyone.
I have a feeling you didn't understand that one.
No, I didn't. You want to explain it?
Who commanded Second Force?
Who commanded Second Force? I don't know. I'm not a history buff.
Takeo Kurita.
Oh! We're making a history joke! Oh! Okay, I get it. He doesn't. I don't get it, but
I take off the center force.
Oh, okay. I understand now. I think you made that joke in the last time we recorded this when we got to the massive naval battles.
We did not, because I didn't even make a connection to Kurita.
Okay. Well, this is a brand new, fresh joke.
New bit.
New bit. Never before seen. Cy and Steve bit. My God, an original idea.
Not the
under
first
the
time
sun.
I've referenced that Kurita, but in this video, yes.
Yeah, it was rather horrendous. This is also a cause for why so many weapons and stuff in the setting would become extinct or so rare that they may as well be. Because all of these rear line raids and all of these deep strikes tended to target advantages that the enemy had that everyone was like, yeah, no, I don't think you should have that. So if the enemy had a Star League factory capable of producing warships, that thing was getting swatted out of space. It was not surviving. If they had a factory that was building like really advanced assault mechs or something, there is no universe where that's going to be left alive for very long. And this is what happened to my favorite mech, the King Crab. Its only factory on the world of Northwind was destroyed during a conflict between the Capellans and the Federated Suns. Its original factory was blown up during the Humorous Rebellion, then its secondary factory on Northwind got obliterated during the Succession Wars because, you know, a fully functional King Crab factory is just not something that the Capellans could be allowed to have. There is no universe where those dirty, filthy, stinking Capellans could get their nasty, grubby little hands all over the best battle mech in all of BattleTech. Get away from the crab, you filthy heathens.
Unbiased opinion, of course.
We pride ourselves on being objective and fair in this in this channel, completely. So the opening stages of the First Succession War were brutal, and despite the fact that it lasted for 35 years, it was really the first 5 to 10 that were the most horrific. That's where the majority of the violence came from. That's where the majority of billions dead were tallied. That's where the dozens of worlds that were glassed and depopulated actually occurred. It was an immensely violent explosion right at the beginning, and then slowly started petering off. The big military toys, however, only had a few defining battles before they were all functionally wiped out. The First Succession War all but obliterated the finely curated warship fleets that had been built and cultivated over hundreds of years. There were countless small-scale naval skirmishes and battles during the Succession War, mostly because warships are what tended to carry the atomic weapons and did the orbital bombarding, but there were a few defining moments. A long-ass time ago, when I did a warship video, I made the statement that warships kind of just faded away, no real climactic end battle, and someone got really mad at me in the comments because there were a few really big battles, but like, enough warships to have naval battles survived into the Second Succession War. They just petered out from lack of maintenance and repair, and the scale was so small that it was kind of pathetic. If I remember correctly, I think the actual last naval battle in the Second Succession War was literally one warship, and it was protecting a landing group, and then it got ganked by like 200 aerospace fighters or something and obliterated. The reason that warships were used so heavily and why they took such an enormous number of casualties, even compared to ground forces and stuff, like if you were an infantryman, you had like a 1 in 5 chance of surviving the First Succession War. That's how bad the atomic obliteration was. Warships, even worse than that. But the reason they suffered so badly isn't what a lot of people might think, where they look at it kind of like a white elephant, where it's useless, it's expensive, but it's big and fancy, so everybody has to build them as this big great house dick measuring contest, basically. That's not true.
I think it would be because it's the opposite, because they were so powerful that they had to get rid of them.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what it is. Warships were basically an if-but statement, where if you have warships, you win. You now have the ultimate high ground. Obi-Wan Kenobi would be proud, and you can obliterate anyone you want on anywhere on a planet at any moment you want. If the enemy has warships of their own, they can contest your landing. They can potentially blow every single one of your transports out of the void before they even get to a world, and you are now down hundreds, if not thousands of mechs and all the crews and supplies for them before you ever even got to the planet. So warships were so heavily attrited away because they were absolutely vital. The enemy having even a single destroyer or frigate in system when you had nothing could spell the complete failure of an invasion. So every single time there was a conflict, no matter how big, no matter how small, there was almost always warships that were taken along as well, and they were almost always the center of combat because they were the deciding factor. You were right as well. They were so big and so powerful that even small engagements could cripple vessels. Like, you take a cruiser up against like 2, maybe 3, like a wolf pack of destroyers, you're probably ending up with 2 dead destroyers, a crippled destroyer, and a crippled cruiser. None of those ships are going to be back in the fight for decades, if maybe ever, from the amount of damage that they've taken, beating each other to a pulp. And so warships really suffered like death of 1,000 cuts early on in the First Succession War, where it was just everywhere, 1,000 battles all at once chipping away at their numbers. But there were a few massive battles that basically wiped out half of all the ships they had left, and I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'm going to give what I think are the 2 biggest ones. The first one, which there isn't a huge amount of information on, but essentially during the Combine invasion of the Federated Suns, their fleets met in orbit of a world that was on the front lines of the Combine's push into the Federated Suns, and they obliterated each other. Over 200 warships, the majority of both of their fleets, rammed into one another alongside presumably thousands of aerospace fighters and probably hundreds of other smaller support ships, like armed and armored landing craft or dropships and stuff. The vast majority of them were wiped out in this battle, to the point where the Federated Suns and the Draconis Combine never recovered. Their naval assets were basically functionally out of the game by this. Another one happened a little bit earlier, and this is more sad, but like the funny kind of sad than anything else, because the poor world just can't get a break. And this was over the world of Hesperus 2. Now, Hesperus 2 was really significant because it was a world that was jointly controlled by the Lyran Commonwealth and Terran Hegemony during the Age of the Star League. And this world had enormous amounts of industry built up on it. Multiple mech factories, countless industrial facilities producing ammo, weapons, armor, metals, materials, whatever. They had orbital factories producing warships, jump ships, fighters, everything you could imagine. Hesperus 2 was a bountifully rich world that had all the industry that you would need to pursue a long-scale war like this. And as such, not only were the Lyrans defending it absolutely viciously, like the Lyrans put 100 combat vessels arrayed in orbit of the planet. Around this one world, they put like 1/3 of their naval power. That's how important it was. However,
that seems a little bit excessive.
Oh, don't worry. For the pounding that Hesperus is about to take, it turned out to not be enough. So multiple fleets of warships from all the factions would assault this world at some point during the First Succession War. The first to try were the Draconis Combine, because of course, if anybody's gonna try to stick their wang into a blender just to see if they can, it's gonna be the Combine. They're always the one that does that kind of shit. The Draconis Combine sent a fleet of some 20 warships and several dozen other armed dropships into the world with the intent of destroying the orbital shipyards. They were eviscerated by the Lyran contenders, barely managing to bring down about a dozen combat vessels, but they did succeed in crippling the orbital warship factories, meaning that the Lyrans could no longer repair and refit directly on the front line. They had to send their ships out of system or deeper into the Commonwealth. A problem that resulted in multiple Commonwealth ships simply being abandoned or scrapped or left to drift onto the planet or into another planet's atmosphere or something because they just didn't have the resources to move them. Next up was the Fed Sons, because if there's anything the Fed Sons like doing, it's watching the Combine walk into a meat grinder and then saying, I can do better than them, watch me be better, and then doing the exact same thing. So the Federated...
Okay, but did they save one more life? I mean, were they better?
I mean, not really. They showed up and tried a lightning raid to smash the planet-side factories and make off with as much loot as possible, and they barely managed to make Planetfall steal like a couple tons of loot, and then half of them died in the process. They did blow up some factories and stuff, which again is a huge issue. Massive loss in production for the Lyrans, but no, they didn't really fare any better than the Draconis Combine. Next up to try was the Free Worlds League, because why leave a good thing unspent when they can try as well? Just keep going. The other two guys walked into the meat grinder, so surely it must be clogged with bodies by now. So the Purple Bird raids the planet again, and unfortunately there's not too much information about this that I could easily find. If anybody in the comments wants to like regale the various audience like down below with the full details or like link to them, feel free. But the description was that the Free Worlds League approached from a strange and unusual angle in their attempt to raid the planet, only to end in similar failure, causing moderate damage to the facilities on Hesperus 2 and getting mostly obliterated. What an unusual or unique approach angle means, I have no idea, but maybe they came from like the directly above,
upside down on the pole, obviously.
Yeah, they're like coming from like above the solar pole or something instead of coming in from the normal jump points. Maybe they jumped into orbit around the sun and they were like, nobody will ever expect this.
They had the sun on their backs, nobody could see them. That's how that works, right?
Surprisingly enough, the only faction, at least until like the next couple succession wars, that showed any restraint was the Capellans, as during the first war, they didn't attack Hesperus.
Wasn't it because they were so broke that they weren't able to mount an offensive?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, the Capellans were getting absolutely...
They would have, but they could have.
Oh, they probably would have if we could have. It's just that the Capellans were getting absolutely ram-fucked by the Free Worlds League and the Federated Suns. The Free Worlds League was taking so many worlds at that point from the Capellan. We're skipping ahead a little bit, but they took so many worlds from the Capellans that it was joked that the head honcho of the Free... I forget what his title was. The guy in charge, the American in charge of the Free Worlds League, could just throw darts at a map of the Confederation, and whatever world the dart landed on, he would just conquer that world. That's how easy it was going. And the Capellans had mustered like their entire navy, basically, in a massive counter-assault to try to push the Free Worlds League back. And that's what the Capellans were busy doing. They didn't have time to throw their ships away into the Hesperus meat grinder. They were busy throwing them away into the Andurian meat grinder, fighting over that one stupid fucking world forever. Fourth and fifth attacks on this planet was Karita again, because of course, by the end of the fifth attack, Hesperus was basically a warship graveyard. Since the space battles could take weeks to months to play out, Hesperus was basically suffering like a year of constant fighting in orbit and on the ground. The Lyrans even reinforced the world several times with more warships and more divisions to try and protect it, but they just kept throwing bodies into the meat grinder until eventually they did enough damage to leave Hesperus 2 alone for the rest of the war, but they're like, all right, it's finally crippled, whatever.
Well deserved. Great use of resources they used there.
And you know what, before we move on to Kentares, because I think we'll leave that as the final one, let's talk about the Capellans a little bit and what they were doing, because there is some very, very humorous events that occurred there, especially with Ilsa Liao and her mother. Yeah, okay, so for anyone that doesn't know, the original leaders of most of these successor states don't survive the first succession war. Most of them die. Minoru Kurita dies, Barbara Liao dies, I don't remember his name, but the Steiner guy dies, and I think the Free Worlds League
He's
guy...
really important to the whole story.
He died before the war even began, and people said he died he died of heartbreak, or he died because it was his divine punishment for allowing the succession wars to happen or whatever, but that's what they said. He literally died before anything important happened, so while
he should have stood up and said it louder that he was the new one, is what I'm hearing. It's because he didn't do that. God struck him down.
Yeah, apparently. He was the successor lord for the Lyran Commonwealth because he was at the negotiations on Terra, but he died before any of the fighting started, because he died like as soon as he got home, so he's not important. He doesn't matter. But most of them don't survive, and Barbara Liao was the leader of the Capellan Confederation for the early years of the war. I think like the first 12, 13 years of the war, and she was not having a good time. The Federated Sons did an enormous amount of damage to the eastern border of the Confederation. However, they had managed to stabilize that border, roughly, and kind of get into a stalemate with the Fed Sons. The Free Worlds League was still unbelievably hammering into their flank, so things were not going well, and then she died. So, you know, things are going even worse now because her heir, Ilsa Liao, did not actually have the requirements to be leader. The problem with her was she was a child when her mom died, only I think like 13 years old, so she didn't have the qualification to be leader. Instead, a regent had to take over and govern the Confederation in her stead until she could come of age. Now, if you might be thinking, damn, this sounds like a Sultan Jafar kind of moment where the regent in charge is going to ruin everything. No, this regent was actually fanatically loyal to House Liao and did his absolute best to preserve the Confederation for Ilsa when she would eventually come of age. The problem was, he did this by leveraging basically everything that the Confederation had. You see, Barbara Liao was kinda set up to preserve what the Confederation had. She didn't want to mindlessly throw resources away because she was keenly aware that they were just objectively the weakest of all the successor states. They had the least industry, the least population. This regent, however,
smart Capellan?
for the most part, yeah. She ended up fighting a lot of counterattacks, which were very well planned and strategized to minimize losses while maximizing gains and pulling Free Worlds League troops away from the offense to defend. The Capellans still suffered horrifically, but they were fighting the war very well. This regent, not so much. He kind of just threw everything the Capellans had into the meat grinder, and this turned out relatively well because they took a whole bunch of worlds from the Federated Sons, they took a whole bunch of worlds back from the Free Worlds League, but the problem came in when Ilsa became the new leader, the coordinator? I don't remember what, no, coordinator is Draconis Combine. I don't remember what the exact title was, but when Ilsa became leader of the Capellan Confederation, she found her nation very poor, stretched to the absolute breaking point, and barely able to hold on to what they had taken. The previous regent had done a very good job of inflicting damage and militarily leading campaigns, but he had done so at the expense of basically burning the Capellan treasury to the ground. So Ilsa had a massive problem, which is they would not be able to sustain this in the long term. So she did something absolutely unexpected, and something I'm genuinely surprised that there's not more people that like write alternate histories or whatever in BattleTech, or like alternate reality things like what ifs, where she basically went to Paul Davian, first prince of the Federated Sons, and was like, hey Paul, I'll make you a deal, okay? We took some worlds from you, give us those worlds. We just keep them, officially cede them to us, all right? Stop hostility with us, we'll make like a non-aggression pact, and in exchange, I, and like forevermore for the Capellans, will renounce our claim on the first lordship of the Star League, and we will also back your claim. So whenever you say, I'm the first lord of the Star League, I'll stand beside you and be like, yup, that's the first lord of the Star League, that's Paul Davian, that guy right there. And in exchange, we can just be friends. Yeah, we'll make a deal. She extended a hand to Paul Davian, basically saying, hey, you want to make an unofficial/official alliance, and once things are ironed out, I'll back your claim to the Star League, right? Now, this was not a genuinely genuine attempt at diplomacy. It was mostly a stalling tactic because she hoped that the months of delays and talks and temporary ceasefire would allow her to get back on her feet, get the Capellans ready for another round of war, and try to recoup some of their losses without needing to worry about their second front and focus everything on the Free Worlds League. And now this is an insane offer, but how do you think Paul Davian responded?
Fuck that shit. I'm taking my worlds back and some.
Yeah, it was, honestly, it's, there's no way to say this. It's so fucking funny to me, the way that this can be explained and still be 100% true. In response to Ilsa Liao's proposal, Paul Davian unleashed the racists upon the Capellans because he sent the most rabidly hateful and extremist units he had to assault the taken worlds, take them back, and then continue to push into Capellan territory. He sent the 3rd and 5th Crucis Lancers, literally described as being among the most rabidly and fiercely anti-Capellan units that the armed forces of the Federated Suns had to muster. I'm gonna be honest, I feel like this was a mistake, because I think it would have been really funny if Paul Davian was just like, yeah, okay, sure. Because do you remember the FedSun episode that we did like forever and a half ago?
Most likely not.
Okay, well, their nobility has this thing where the FedSuns produce a lot more princes and princesses than like all the other noble houses. There's a lot of Davian nobles, okay? One of the surefire ways for a lot of them to get political power, because you've got like the 8th son in line or the 9th daughter in line for the throne or whatever, is to go off and marry other nobles. So the Federated Sons are literally Mr. Steal Yo Girl or Steal Yo Man, because they marry into the noble houses of other families more than any other faction. So there would have been a really, really, really funny opportunity for here, like what happened with the Federated Commonwealth, because Hans Davion, Mr. Steal Yo Archon, married, I think it was like Katrina Steiner, and they made the Federated Commonwealth. There was an opportunity here for Paul Davian to be like, yeah, okay, fine, let's seal the deal with marriage then, and kind of put Ilsa Liao in checkmate, where they're like, look, if you're serious, let's do it, sure, why not? But if you're not, I've got a gaggle of raging racists behind me ready to go to town on the worlds that you took. So I'm surprised that there isn't like an alternate history or alternate universe where this actually happened, because I think it would be so funny. It would be a disaster. It would be actually like the worst thing that the Federated Sons could do, forming an alliance with the Capellans, but it would be so funny.
And this is why we ask you, dear viewer, to submit your stories to Sai so he can read them and have a laugh.
Yeah, write your fan fiction in the comments below. Ilsa Liao x Paul Davion romance fiction. Let's go. Capellan Confederation merges with the Federated Sons to make the Federated Confederation. That's a stupid name.
The name fits in with the franchise.
Yeah, the Federated Confederation. Let's go. That's a dumb name. Oh god, we are so
They
off
won't
topic.
be able to differentiate it with anything else, with any other.
Oh
factions,
god,
so.
we're like an hour and a half into this recording. The second time we've done it,
God.
so this is the equivalent of 3 hours.
We're up
recording.
at 4 a.m. right now.
Yeah, this is like we're having the worst time.
Speaking of which, you forgot to mention that when you did the Star Wars.
yeah. When I made that Star Wars joke, that Aldebaran and near Death Star, when I was originally writing this, I wrote that joke at like 3 or like 4 a.m. or something, and I could barely think, and I was misspelling every other word. When I looked at it the next morning, I'm like, wow, this is bad, but I'm gonna keep it in anyways because
immediately went to bed.
yeah, immediately fell asleep afterwards. But the Capellan front was not going well at all. They were suffering rather horribly, and the fact that Ilsa Liao could not get this deal or this temporary truce with the Fed Sons, and she also decided to pick a fight with the nascent Comstar at that point, contributed to the fact that during the First Succession War, the Capellans really didn't suffer that many territorial losses. Like, if you look at a map, they had a pretty hefty chunk bitten out of them, but it wasn't that bad. Every other Succession War after that is like, oh my god, they lose like another 20% of their territory. And that's because the First Succession War burned out the majority of what the Capellans had. Like, out of all the factions, the Capellans Talons could not rebuild enough at all in time for the second or third or fourth one. They were permanently on the back foot ever since the very first Succession War. And this is why, because they got hammered so hard right at the beginning. Now that brings us to Kentares, and this is arguably the worst atrocity that was committed in the entire first Succession War by the Combine, because it's always the Combine, villains of the setting. And the reason it was so brutal is because, for the most part, the entire Combine Fed Sun front is analogous to the war in the Pacific. Just like in World War II, where the Japanese surprise attacked 3 dozen islands all at the same time, like the Draconis Combine did the same thing. They threw an entire third of their total forces directly at the Fed Suns, overwhelming 5 different worlds at the same time. But they didn't just stop to hold them. As they advanced, they would destroy everything, scatter the populations, devastate the garrisons, and then move on. And then it could be days, it could be weeks, it could be months later, and then rear line garrison forces would show up to clean up the mess. By doing this, the Combine moved so quickly that a lot of planets weren't even able to get out distress calls. Now, this all changed when they got to the world of Kentares. Now, you see, Kentares was a relatively beautiful world.
Well, at this point in time.
It would, at this point in time, yeah. It would rapidly change after the Caretans were done with it, but it was a very beautiful world. And while they pushed through it with very little effort and were planning on continuing on, because by this point, the Draconis Combine was on the doorstep of New Avalon. They were 2 jumps away from attacking the capital world of the Federated Suns. And in a lot of ways, they probably were going to win. There's a good chance that had they not fumbled right here, they may have been able to knock the Federated Suns completely out of the war or destroy them outright. But on Kentares, Minoru Kurita, in his Battlemaster, decided to take a diversion from the scheduled transport lane. He was going somewhere and he decided he was just going to wander off into this forest because he found it beautiful. After getting a ways inside, he found it so incredible that he got out of his battle mech and, alongside several other bodyguards, began walking through on foot. Can you guess what happened to him?
He got murked by maybe a sniper or something.
Yep, part of the strategy that the Combine was using created a lot of partisans and guerrilla forces, because they devastated the local forces and then scattered them off into the forests and mountains and jungles of the planet. Normally, this isn't much of a problem, because the garrison forces can come in later and then clean it up. But in this case, partisans and remnants of Kentares' garrison were still operating on the planet, and one of them stumbled across Minoru Kurita. And because Minoru had this weird thing about not displaying his grandeur, he only wore the uniform of a corporal, nothing else. So this sniper lined up what she thought was a normal officer, pulled the trigger, and with a shot through the back, killed Minoru Kurita. This was a horrible, horrible, horrible mistake, because while Minoru Kurita is insane and bloodthirsty and stupid, he's also relatively level-headed for a Caret. He's the kind of person that understands maybe there are other options besides murder. His son, Jinjiro Kurita, is basically just a rabid animal, and there's no reason to even refer to him as a human being, because he's not. He's an animal. In response to his father's death, he declared everyone on Kentares would die. His officers were like, "Oh, you mean all the military and stuff?" He said, "No, everyone." And they were like, you mean all the military-aged people?" "No, everyone." You mean everyone who doesn't, submit to the dragon willingly?" "No, everyone. Every single person on the planet." And he ordered their brutal executions in the most personal, evil way imaginable. His soldiers were not allowed to use guns or nukes or bombs, nothing that would be fast. No, they would drag
They had to save on the ammunition, man. It's expensive running a war effort.
Normally I'd respond to the joke, but this is unironically one of the most horrific things ever. And for anyone that doesn't know, there are, I don't know if it's directly inspired by, I don't remember hearing anything about that from the writer, but
it seems pretty directly inspired.
It is
being honest.
Yeah, it seems almost directly inspired by what the Imperial Japanese did in Nanking in real life. You can almost follow it like beat for beat of what the Koreans did. It is beyond horrific. A planet of 51 million people was butchered to a man by this absolute psychopath. And I want to be like, I'm gonna jump in before people who are like, what the raw numbers? No, this is not by numbers the biggest massacre that happened in BattleTech's first succession war. There were many planets that had a significantly higher death toll, but the difference is that those worlds, it was fast. It was the mercy of being fast. Because if 100 million people died from an orbital bombardment of 500 nuclear warheads, the vast majority of them, it's blink and they're gone. So this was really, in many ways, the end of what people would consider the first succession war proper. Because this broke their Draconis Combine. The generals that had been pushing so aggressively for Minoru Kurita and had been doing so well, they lost their minds. Some of them simply killed themselves. Some of them went insane and just stopped talking or stopped reacting. Some of them just wandered off into the forests and wilderness of the various planets they had conquered and allowed the partisans to kill them, simply kept on fighting but couldn't muster the will to live. So the moment they were pushed by Federated Sun forces, they just kind of stood there and died. And this was because Comstar broke their rules of neutrality here and broadcast it to the entire inner sphere what was happening. And it was also a turning point for the Federated Suns, because the Federated Suns, who had all but given up by that point, looked at what was happening and essentially lost their mind. Mech warriors that would otherwise eject once their armor was breached kept on fighting until their machine was nothing but scrap metal. And once they finally ejected, when they had no ammo and weapons left, they picked up a rifle or a grenade launcher or something, and they kept on fighting, or they went back to get another one. No downtime, no rest. Their entire military was reinvigorated with what can only be described as holy rage, and they pushed the Koretans all the way back to the original border before the succession war had started, taking back functionally every world they had. And for the most part, like I mentioned, this is kind of the end of the first succession war, because while it did drag on for 35 years, it was the first like 6, 7, 8 years where all of this happened, and this is kind of the capstone. The next 20 years going on from this, the next 30 years going on from this, it was relatively low-scale skirmishes, relatively small-scale engagements, because the great houses were gassed. That's it. That's all they had. They had thrown away most of their military. Their stockpiles of atomic weapons had been all but depleted. There was no more will to fight, but there was also no will to surrender or to make peace. Kurita wouldn't make peace because Jinjiro was insane. The Fedsuns wouldn't make peace because Jinjiro was insane. The Capellans wouldn't make peace because Paul Davion unleashed Paul Davion did a Davion on the Capellans, and the Free Worlds League and the Lyrans wouldn't make peace because they had also suffered horrendously at the hands of one another. And the first succession war didn't really end, it just kind of petered out. So the declaration of like a second succession war isn't really accurate because the first one never ended. It just got really low scale for a while as the various factions tried to build up. I said this at the beginning, and the beginning of the video started out relatively light. There's a bit of levity, but like the succession war just keeps getting worse. As bad as you think it is, it will always keep getting worse. So there's really no way to end this video on a high or positive note. Instead, I'm just gonna say, hey, if you made it this far in the video, maybe you were one of those people that Steve was joking about that come here to be sad. I guess subscribe, like, comment, do all of that stuff to help with the YouTube algorithm.
Censor your fan fictions, answer our questions from throughout the video down there.
Make sure to do that. If you would like to support the channel, throw some money our way. We have channel memberships. You occasionally get to vote on future content and what stuff gets made. You get early access a day or two to videos, and occasionally you'll get cut behind the scenes content that the regular people don't because for whatever reason it will not make it live. Or if you just want to hang out, we have a Discord server where you can just join in, play games with your fellow turbo nerds, hang out, shoot the shit, generally enjoy science fiction in a small, like-minded community. And with that, the video's functionally over. I have nothing else to say.
Wait. I have a way to end this on a high note.
Oh my fucking god.